Walk through any 1960s home and you'd find 20 features that architects now call death traps. The government banned them all within a single decade, but the real shock is discovering which one was considered the most dangerous. Walk into any home in 1972 and you'd be greeted by carpeting that looked like it belonged in a psychedelic fever dream. Bright orange shag so thick you could lose a small child in it. Lime green that practically glowed in the dark. Purple so bold it made your eyes water. Everyone thought they were living in the future. The deeper the pile, the cooler you were. Some of this stuff was 3 inches thick, basically indoor grass that cost a fortune. But here's the thing nobody mentioned in those fancy home magazines. Shag carpet trapped everything. Every speck of dust, every crumb from your TV dinner, every mysterious particle that floated through your house somehow found its way deep into those fibers and set up permanent residence. Cleaning it? Well, that was an adventure. You couldn't just run a regular vacuum over this stuff. You needed industrial equipment that looked more like farm machinery. Some people actually used rakes, actual garden rakes, to fluff it back up after vacuuming. The whole process took longer than mowing your lawn. And somehow, no matter how much you cleaned, there was always more dirt hiding in there somewhere. By the late 70s, people started catching on. All that groovy carpeting began looking more grimy than groovy. But shag wasn't the only thing homeowners were getting tired of. After tiptoeing around all that shag carpeting, homeowners in the 70s discovered another revolutionary design idea: conversation pits. These were sunken living room areas, dropped down a few steps from the main floor level. The concept was simple: create an intimate space where guests could lounge with cocktails and have deep, meaningful conversations. Well, at least that was the theory. Interior design magazines made them look absolutely futuristic. Sleek, modern, sophisticated. You'd see these gorgeous photos with beautiful people sitting around on built-in cushioned seating, drinks in hand, looking like they were living in the year 2000. But here's what those glossy magazines didn't show you: people constantly falling into the damn things. Especially after a few of those cocktails the pits were supposedly designed around. Nothing says sophisticated entertaining like watching Uncle Bob tumble down 3 steps while carrying a martini. The whole concept became a literal stumbling block. Guests would forget about the step down, particularly in dimmer lighting during those groovy dinner parties. Insurance companies probably weren't thrilled either. Then there's the practical stuff nobody thought about initially. Cleaning became a nightmare. Vacuuming required awkward maneuvering. Kids treated them like indoor playgrounds, which wasn't exactly the mature adult ambiance homeowners were going for. By the early 80s, open floor plans started taking over, and conversation pits quietly disappeared into design history. Speaking of questionable color choices that defined the decade, remember when kitchens looked like they were decorated by someone who really, really loved vegetables? Welcome to the era of avocado green appliances, the color that somehow convinced an entire generation it screamed sophistication. Every appliance manufacturer jumped on this bandwagon. Fridges, ovens, dishwashers, even kitchen sinks came in that distinctive muddy green shade. It wasn't just an accent color. People went full commitment. Your grandmother probably had a complete avocado kitchen set, and she was proud of it. The thing is, it actually looked pretty sharp at first. Against white walls and dark wood cabinets, that green had a certain earthy elegance. It felt modern, natural, almost futuristic in a weird 70s way. Interior designers pushed it hard, claiming it brought nature indoors. But here's what nobody anticipated. Avocado green aged about as well as actual avocados. What seemed fresh and trendy in 1972 looked downright depressing by 1978. The color started feeling heavy, dated, almost sickly under different lighting. Makes sense, right? Try explaining to your spouse why you need a new refrigerator just because the color went out of style. These weren't cheap purchases either. People were stuck with their green kitchens for years. By the 80s, everyone was desperately seeking plain white or emerging stainless steel options. Speaking of things that seemed like great ideas but created unexpected problems, who needs a regular mattress when you could sleep on a giant bag of water? That was the sales pitch that convinced millions of Americans to ditch their box springs for the ultimate groovy sleep experience. Waterbeds promised everything. Better back support, temperature control, a space-age sleeping surface that would make you feel like you were floating on clouds. The marketing made it sound like NASA had personally designed your bedroom furniture. Well, the reality was a bit wetter. These things leaked constantly, not just a little drip here and there. We're talking full-blown indoor floods that could ruin your hardwood floors and destroy everything you owned. One tiny puncture from a pet's claw or an overzealous romantic moment, and suddenly you're dealing with 200 gallons of water spreading through your house like a mini tsunami. But here's the kicker. They were ridiculously heavy. A full waterbed could weigh over 1,000 pounds. Some apartment buildings started banning them outright because landlords got tired of paying for structural damage. Imagine explaining to your downstairs neighbor why their ceiling just collapsed. The maintenance was brutal too. You had to add chemicals to prevent algae growth. Yes, algae in your bed. Nothing says good night's sleep quite like worrying about pond scum forming under your sheets. By the early 80s, most people realized that maybe, just maybe, solid ground was better for sleeping. Speaking of questionable doorway decisions, nothing says hippie chic quite like walking through a curtain of beads instead of opening an actual door. Homeowners in the 70s thought these jangling barriers were the height of bohemian sophistication. Every head shop and home decor magazine promised they'd transform your boring doorway into a mystical portal. Well, mystical maybe, practical? Not so much. The moment someone walked through, it sounded like a wind chime factory exploding. Late-night trips to the bathroom became announce yourself to the whole house affairs. Forget sneaking anywhere. Those beads rattled louder than a maraca concert. Then there's the maintenance nightmare nobody mentioned in those groovy magazines. Individual beads constantly broke off, leaving gaps that looked like missing teeth. The strings tangled into knots that would have challenged a sailor. And don't even think about moving furniture through those doorways. Half the beads would end up scattered across the floor like colorful confetti. Pet owners discovered another delightful surprise. Cats treated beaded doorways like the world's most expensive cat toy, batting at dangling strands until the whole thing looked like it went through a blender. Dogs just bulldozed right through, creating their own bead-free express lane. By the late 70s, most people quietly replaced their psychedelic portals with something revolutionary. Actual doors that opened and closed. Makes sense, right? But speaking of questionable bedroom choices, let's talk about what some folks installed above their beds. Nothing said sophisticated bedroom in 1972, quite like a mirrored ceiling. Well, that's what the magazines promised anyway. Picture this sales pitch. Why settle for boring white plaster when you could have an entire reflective surface overhead? Interior designers pushed these hard, claiming they'd make bedrooms feel twice as spacious. The disco era loved anything that sparkled, so naturally, people went wild for ceiling mirrors. But here's where reality hit like a cold shower. First problem? Cleaning the damn things. Ever tried scrubbing Windex off a surface 8 feet above your head? Your arms would give out before you got halfway across. Those streaks weren't just annoying, they were right there, staring down at you every single night. Makes sense, right? Then there was the weight issue. These weren't lightweight mirrors. We're talking heavy glass tiles that required serious structural support. Some contractors had no clue what they were doing, leading to a few, let's call them unfortunate incidents involving gravity. The real death blow came when people realized mirrored ceilings looked incredible in dim lighting, but absolutely ridiculous in broad daylight. Nothing kills romance faster than seeing every ceiling smudge reflected back at you during your morning coffee. By 1978, most folks were quietly removing their ceiling mirrors, probably wondering what possessed them in the first place. Speaking of questionable 1970s home improvements, let's talk about wood paneling. Nothing said modern home improvement, quite like slapping some wood paneling on your walls in 1972. Hardware stores couldn't keep the stuff in stock. Homeowners were absolutely convinced they discovered the secret to instant sophistication. The basement got hit first, naturally. Dad would spend entire weekends measuring, cutting, and nailing up those dark brown strips. "We're turning this into a real family room," he'd announce proudly. And honestly, for about 5 minutes, it looked pretty sharp. But here's what nobody mentioned in those home improvement magazines. Wood paneling made every room feel like you were living inside a tree trunk. The fake grain patterns were so obviously fake that even your dog looked embarrassed. Worse yet, the stuff absorbed light like a black hole. You'd flip on 3 lamps and still feel like you were spelunking. By the mid-70s, people started noticing their modern rooms felt more like medieval dungeons. Kids complained they couldn't see their homework. Wives started dropping hints about brightening things up. The novelty wore off faster than cheap cologne. The real kicker? Removing wood paneling turned into a weekend project from hell. Those adhesive strips clung to drywall like they were protecting state secrets. Speaking of 70s homeowners making questionable entertainment choices, wait until you hear what they installed right next to the wood-paneled walls. Nothing said sophisticated homeowner quite like having your own built-in bar in 1972. Every suburban split level seemed to sprout one overnight, complete with mirrored backsplashes and fancy cabinet lighting. These weren't just drink stations, they were lifestyle statements. Homeowners stocked them with crystal decanters filled with whiskey, rows of martini glasses, and those little cocktail stirrers with plastic swords. The whole setup screamed, "We're classy people who throw dinner parties." But here's the thing about drinking culture in America. It shifts faster than fashion trends. By the late 70s, the 3-martini lunch was losing its appeal. Health consciousness crept in. Wine replaced hard liquor for many families. Those elaborate bar setups started looking less like sophisticated entertaining spaces and more like relics from another era. What really killed the built-in bar? Well, maintenance was a nightmare. All that glassware collected dust. The ice makers broke constantly. And let's be honest, most people discovered they weren't hosting nearly as many cocktail parties as they'd imagined. The final blow came when families realized they needed storage space more than a place to mix drinks. By the early 80s, former bars had transformed into coffee stations, homework nooks, or just plain old cabinets stuffed with kids' art supplies. Speaking of bathroom design choices that seemed brilliant at first, walking into a 70s bathroom was like stepping into a rainbow explosion. Pink toilets sat next to turquoise bathtubs, while mustard yellow sinks completed the colorful trio. Homeowners couldn't get enough of these bold bathroom fixtures. The bolder, the better. Avocado green toilets paired beautifully with matching shag toilet seat covers. Yes, shag on toilets was actually a thing. Some families went full peacock with deep purple tubs that made every bath feel like a royal experience. At first, these vibrant bathrooms looked absolutely stunning. Magazine spreads showcased entire families gathered around their flamingo pink fixtures, beaming with pride. Interior designers swore colored bathrooms were the future of home design. But here's the kicker. They aged worse than a bad haircut. Those gorgeous pink toilets started looking dingy within months. Water stains showed up like neon signs against the bright colors. That beautiful turquoise tub. Every soap scum ring became a permanent art installation. Cleaning became a nightmare because you couldn't hide anything on these bold surfaces. By the late 70s, real estate agents were practically begging sellers to replace their colorful bathroom fixtures. Potential buyers would walk into these psychedelic bathrooms and immediately start calculating replacement costs. The writing was on the wall, or rather, reflected in those colorful porcelain surfaces. Everyone wanted neutral, timeless white bathrooms again. Speaking of things mounted on walls that seemed essential back then, back when phones had actual cords and lived in one spot, home builders thought they'd solved everything with telephone niches. These little built-in wall alcoves became the perfect spot for your rotary phone, complete with a tiny shelf for the phone book and sometimes even a cute little stool for marathon conversations. Every new house in the early 70s had one. Usually tucked into the kitchen or hallway, these niches made perfect sense when your phone weighed about as much as a brick and never moved. The fancier versions came with their own lighting and decorative trim. Some families even had multiple niches throughout the house, one downstairs, one upstairs, maybe one in the master bedroom. But then, cordless phones showed up in the 80s. Suddenly you could walk around while talking. Revolutionary stuff. Those carefully planned niches started looking pretty silly when your phone could roam the entire house. The real death blow came with cell phones in the 90s. Why would anyone need a dedicated phone spot when everyone carried their own personal device? Those built-in niches became awkward little holes in the wall. Some people stuffed them with decorative items or small plants, trying to make them look intentional. Most got covered up during renovations, leaving behind ghost outlines where telephone history once lived. Speaking of things that seemed protective but backfired spectacularly, nothing said, "Protect the good furniture," quite like wrapping your entire living room in clear plastic. These slipcovers were supposed to keep your sofa looking brand new forever. Well, they succeeded at that. They also succeeded at making your home feel like a furniture showroom nobody was allowed to touch. Summer was absolute torture. The moment you sat down, your skin would stick to the plastic like you'd been glued there. Getting up meant peeling yourself off with a sound that could wake the neighbors. Forget wearing shorts or a sundress, you'd leave half your skin behind. Kids hated these things most of all. Sliding around was impossible, and forget about getting comfortable for movie night. The plastic would crack and split over time, creating sharp edges that could catch your clothes or scratch your legs. Parents would patch them with tape, making the whole setup look even more ridiculous. The worst part? They defeated their own purpose. Sure, the fabric underneath stayed pristine, but who cared when your furniture looked like it belonged in a doctor's office? Guests never knew quite what to do. Sit gingerly? Perch on the edge? Most just stood. By the late 70s, people realized protecting furniture you couldn't actually enjoy was pretty pointless. But speaking of things that made homes feel less welcoming, let's talk about those massive mirrored walls that reflected every awkward moment. Nothing screams sophisticated 70s dining quite like an entire wall covered in mirrors. These weren't just any mirrors. We're talking floor-to-ceiling reflective surfaces that supposedly made your dining room look twice as big and infinitely more glamorous. The idea seemed brilliant on paper. Why not double your dinner party visually? Your guests would feel like they were dining in some fancy restaurant instead of your suburban split level. Interior designers pushed these mirrored walls hard, promising they'd create the illusion of space and luxury. But here's what nobody warned you about. Mirrors don't just reflect the good stuff. That awkward moment when Uncle Bob spilled wine on his shirt? Reflected. Your mother-in-law's disapproving face when you served store-bought pie? Double the judgment, right there on the wall. Every uncomfortable silence, every food and teeth moment, every time someone picked their nose thinking nobody was looking. All broadcast in high-definition reflection. Then there were the practical nightmares. Cleaning streaks off a regular bathroom mirror is annoying enough. Try maintaining an entire wall of spotless glass while trying to look classy for dinner guests. One fingerprint and the whole illusion crumbled. The worst part? These mirrors made everyone incredibly self-conscious. Instead of enjoying conversation, people spent the evening checking their hair and wondering if they looked fat from that angle. Speaking of surfaces that seemed genius until reality hit, let's talk about what happened when homeowners looked up and decided their ceilings needed some serious texture. Want to know the fastest way to spot a home from the 70s? Look up. Those bumpy, textured ceilings that looked like cottage cheese were everywhere back then. Popcorn ceilings seemed brilliant at first. One quick spray job could hide every crack, dent, and imperfection in your ceiling. No need for perfect drywall work or expensive repairs. Just point, spray, and boom. Instant modern texture that supposedly added character to any room. The marketing made it sound revolutionary. Acoustic texture ceiling treatment was the fancy name contractors used. It would absorb sound, they claimed, make your home quieter and more sophisticated. Well, that lasted about 5 minutes. Here's what they didn't mention in those glossy advertisements. Popcorn ceilings were dust magnets. Every speck of dirt, every cobweb, every bit of cooking grease floating through the air would stick to those bumpy surfaces like glue. Try cleaning them? Good luck. One gentle wipe with a cloth and chunks would fall off, leaving bald spots that looked even worse. And don't get me started on painting over them. The texture would soak up paint like a sponge, requiring coat after coat to get even coverage. By the 80s, people were hiring contractors just to scrape the stuff off. What once seemed like the height of modern convenience became the bane of every homeowner's existence. Speaking of outdoor disasters from the 70s, picture walking onto someone's patio in 1975 and seeing what looked like the world's flattest lawn. That's right, people actually carpeted their outdoor spaces with bright green indoor-outdoor carpet that was supposed to mimic grass. The concept seemed brilliant at first. Why deal with watering, mowing, or fertilizing when you could just roll out some artificial turf and call it a day? These carpets came in that unmistakable shade of lime green that screamed modern living. No more muddy footprints, no more dead patches, no more weekend yard work. But Mother Nature had other plans. The first rainstorm revealed the fatal flaw. This stuff soaked up water like a massive sponge and held onto it for dear life. Instead of drying out like real grass, it stayed soggy for days. Then came the smell. that musty, moldy odor that hit you the moment you stepped outside. Within a year, most of these carpet patios looked like science experiments gone wrong. Black mold crept along the edges. The bright green faded to a sickly yellow-brown. Walking on it felt like stepping on a wet mattress. Smart homeowners started ripping it out and investing in wooden decks or stone patios instead. Turns out sometimes the old-fashioned way actually works better. Speaking of things that look sophisticated but created more problems than they solved, nothing said sophisticated 70s living quite like a smoked glass coffee table gleaming darkly in your conversation pit. These tinted glass surfaces were everywhere. Dining tables, end tables, even massive entertainment centers with that mysterious dark sheen. The appeal was obvious. Smoked glass looked expensive and modern, especially when paired with chrome legs and positioned perfectly over wall-to-wall shag carpeting. Interior designers couldn't get enough of them, well, at least until reality set in. Here's what nobody mentioned in those glossy home magazines. Smoked glass shows absolutely everything. Every fingerprint, every water ring, every microscopic speck of dust. The darker the tint, the more obvious every mark became. And cleaning them? Pure torture. You'd wipe the surface clean, step back to admire your work, and immediately spot 3 new fingerprints you somehow missed. The glass cleaner industry probably made a fortune off smoked glass table owners alone. But the real problem wasn't maintenance. It was timing. By the early 80s, that dark, mysterious look started feeling heavy and dated rather than sleek and modern. People wanted brighter, airier spaces. Clear glass made rooms feel open and light. The final nail in the coffin came when someone realized you couldn't actually see what you'd set down on these tables. Lost your keys again? Check under the smoked glass. They're probably invisible against that dark surface. Speaking of things that seemed luxurious but created unexpected problems, nothing said, "I've made it," quite like having your own cigarette machine right there in the house. These gleaming chrome dispensers weren't just for bars and restaurants anymore. Well-to-do smokers installed them in their dens, basement rec rooms, and even living areas. You'd stock them with cartons of Marlboro, Winston, or whatever brand guests preferred. Pull the lever, drop in some change, and out came a fresh pack. The ultimate conversation starter at cocktail parties. But here's the thing about cigarette machines at home. They made smoking feel way too automatic. Kids could see them every day, making cigarettes seem as normal as grabbing a soda. Not exactly the family-friendly vibe most parents were going for. Then the health warnings started getting serious in the mid-70s. Suddenly, that cool chrome machine looked less like a luxury accessory and more like a health hazard sitting in your den. The novelty wore off fast when people realized they were basically running a tobacco shop in their living room. Plus, maintaining these things was a hassle. You had to keep them stocked, cleaned, and the coin mechanisms working. Most folks discovered it was easier to just buy cigarettes at the store like normal people. By the late 70s, these home cigarette machines quietly disappeared from most houses. Speaking of things that quietly vanished from homes, nothing screamed modern sophistication quite like a Sunburst clock hanging in your living room. These weren't just timepieces. They were artistic statements with metal rays shooting out in every direction like a metallic explosion frozen in time. Every trendy home had one by 1972. The bigger and flashier, the better. Some had rays that stretched 3 feet across the wall, turning your humble ranch house into what felt like a space-age palace. Gold, copper, silver, whatever matched your Avocado appliances and orange shag carpet. But here's the thing about bold design statements. They get old fast. What looked cutting edge in 73 felt tired by 76. Suddenly, Grandma's house had the exact same Sunburst clock and that hip, futuristic vibe. Gone. The rays collected dust like nobody's business, and cleaning between all those spikes became a weekly nightmare. Then there's the size problem. These things dominated entire walls. When minimalism started creeping back into style, that giant starburst felt less like modern art and more like visual clutter. Many ended up in garage sales with 50-cent price tags. The irony? Today's vintage collectors pay serious money for authentic Sunburst clocks. What was grandma decor in 1978 is now retro gold. Speaking of things that seem practical but turned into complete disasters, let's talk about one bathroom trend that still makes people shudder. Look, the 70s had some questionable ideas, but carpeted bathrooms might top the list. Yes, you read that right. Wall-to-wall shag carpet right next to your toilet. Somehow, interior designers convinced homeowners this was luxurious. Why should your feet touch cold tile? They asked. The carpet industry was booming, and bathrooms seemed like untapped territory. Harvest gold and avocado green carpets sprawled from the bathtub to the toilet base. At first, it felt cozy. Your toes stayed warm on winter mornings. The bathroom seemed more like a bedroom extension than a utilitarian space. Fancy. But reality hit fast. Every shower created a soggy mess. Steam soaked into those carpet fibers daily. The area around the toilet, well, let's just say accuracy wasn't everyone's strong suit. Toothpaste splatters, hair products, and mysterious bathroom spills all found permanent homes in that carpet. Cleaning became a nightmare. You couldn't mop it. Vacuuming barely helped. Professional carpet cleaners would shake their heads and quote, ridiculous prices. The smell developed gradually. That musty, indefinable bathroom carpet odor that no amount of air freshener could mask. Makes sense why this trend died faster than disco, right? By the early 80s, people were ripping out those carpets and embracing tile again. Sometimes common sense wins, but speaking of things that needed constant adjustment in 70s living rooms, those metal contraptions with extending rods sat on top of every television set in America. Rabbit ears, as everyone called them, became as essential as the couch itself. Without cable or satellite dishes, these antennas were your only ticket to watching anything beyond a snow-filled screen. The ritual was always the same. Someone would hold the ears at just the right angle while another person yelled from across the room about picture quality. "Hold it there! No, move it left! Too far!" Sound familiar? Then came the aluminum foil trick that everyone swore by. Wrapping those antennas in Reynolds wrap supposedly boosted reception, though it mostly just made your living room look like a spacecraft landed in it. Weather turned these things into your worst enemy. Rain meant fuzzy channels, wind meant constantly readjusting. And forget about watching anything during a thunderstorm. You'd get better reception from a potato. The truly desperate tried everything. Coat hangers, paper clips, even having the tallest family member stand next to the TV holding the antenna. Kids became human TV adjusters, stuck in awkward positions for entire shows because moving even slightly would ruin the signal. But here's what nobody saw coming. Some homeowners were about to take entertainment into their own hands in ways that would make rabbit ears look downright sensible. Well, here's where some families really went overboard with home entertainment. Roller rinks in basements became the ultimate 70s status symbol for parents who wanted to be the cool house on the block. Picture this. Dad comes home one day and announces he's converting the basement into a skating paradise. Mom thinks it's brilliant. The kids will stay active indoors. What could go wrong? Everything, apparently. These makeshift rinks used vinyl flooring or smooth tiles, turning basements into slippery death traps. Kids would strap on their roller skates and immediately transform into tiny wrecking balls. Coffee tables didn't stand a chance. Neither did Mom's favorite lamp or Dad's prized stereo system. The crashes were legendary. Tommy would barrel into the water heater. Susan would wipe out near the washing machine, and somehow every single skating session ended with someone crying and at least one piece of furniture sporting fresh battle scars. But the real problem? Parents quickly realized they'd created a monster. The constant rumbling overhead sounded like a herd of elephants. Downstairs, neighbors and apartments filed noise complaints. Even single-family homes weren't safe. The vibrations rattled dishes in the kitchen above. By 1978, most basement roller rinks had quietly disappeared. Turns out there's a reason real skating rinks have padded walls and insurance policies. Home versions just had frustrated parents and mounting repair bills.